A cold, ancient wind, not a storm, but a whisper in the frost, older than the seven kingdoms, older than Valyria, older than the world we know. In the frozen silence north of the wall, something waits, something that defies time, reason, and death itself. He doesn't speak, he doesn't bleed, he doesn't feel, but he remembers, and his name is not a name, it's a warning, the Night King. For years, we saw him as death incarnate, a supernatural force, a walking myth. But what if that's only part of the story? What if everything we've been told by the maesters, the legends, even the show itself, was only a fraction of the truth? This is not just a story about war and winter. This is about prophecy, betrayal, and the echoes of a world long buried under ice and blood. Over the next 2 hours, we will unravel the greatest mystery in Westeros, a mystery that the final season of Game of Thrones only began to touch. We'll question everything, because behind every silence, every stare, every step the Night King takes, there is purpose, there is memory, and there is something we missed. They say he was created by the children of the forest in an act of desperation. They say they plunged dragonglass into a man's heart and turned him into a monster. But who was that man? And why him? Why not one of their own? Why a man of the first men? Was it random, or was it fate? What if that man was someone important, someone ancient, someone who still walks the world in ways we don't understand? Let's go back. Before the Targaryens, before the Andals, before the first men, back when Westeros was nothing but wild forest, deep magic, and forgotten gods. The children of the forest ruled these lands, but not alone. There were things deeper in the earth, things even they feared. Some say the children were guardians of nature. Others say they were manipulators of blood and bone, playing with magic they barely understood. In their fear of men, they created a weapon that could not be controlled. The Night King wasn't just a mistake. He was a curse, or maybe a message. Why didn't he speak? Not once, not even when he stood face to face with Jon Snow. Not when he marked Bran Stark, not when he raised the dead at Hardhome, silently, mockingly, and stared into the eyes of the living. Because maybe words were beneath him. Or maybe. Part 2. The Origin Ritual. What the children of the forest were hiding, deep within the heart of the forest, surrounded by ancient trees whose roots drank the blood of gods. They gathered, not men, not beasts, but the children. And before them, a man, bound, struggling, screaming. They say it was fear that drove them, fear of the first men, invaders who chopped down their weirwood trees, desecrated their sacred groves, and spilled blood on land that was never theirs. The children of the forest were not warriors. They were not conquerors. They were something far more dangerous. Magicians, keepers of an older kind of knowledge. A magic so primal it wasn't spoken, it was felt. And on one cold day, in a place forgotten by maps, they performed a ritual that would echo through thousands of years. They took dragonglass, obsidian, the frozen fire of the gods, and drove it into the heart of a man. A first man. The land screamed, the wind died, and the world changed forever. But here's the question. Why him? Why that man? Why not an animal? Why not one of their own? What made this man, that specific man, the perfect vessel for their darkest spell? Because it wasn't random. It couldn't have been. The children understood life and spirit better than any living race. They chose him, and that choice may have been their greatest mistake, or their greatest secret. Look closely. In that brief scene we were shown, Bran's vision, the ritual, there's something haunting in the expression of the man before the dragonglass pierces his heart. It isn't fear. It's not even rage. It's understanding, as if somehow he knew what was coming. What if he allowed it? What if he wanted it? What if this wasn't a sacrifice, but a transformation? The children may have believed they were binding a monster to serve them, But perhaps from the very beginning, the monster knew what they didn't. Magic that old doesn't obey. It corrupts. It reclaims. The ritual was meant to create a weapon, a being of ice to fight back against fire and steel. But in the process, they may have awakened a mind older than their own, a soul that refused to sleep. Some believe the children tapped into something they couldn't control, a primal force of the world like the old ones whispered in northern folktales. But what if the dragon glass wasn't the source of the power, but a key? A key to something already inside that man. Consider this. Why didn't the children try again? Why, in all the years of war and bloodshed, did they never create another Night King? Why only once? Because maybe they couldn't. Maybe the spell wasn't repeatable, not because of the ritual, but because of who he was. In the secret histories of the North, passed down in hushed tones by wildlings and forgotten clans, there are tales of a being with eyes like frost, who walked the world long before the wall was ever raised. Some call him the Iceborn King, others the Pale One. Some refuse to name him at all. Was he a man cursed by the gods, or a god who chose to become a man? We'll never know, not from the maesters, not from books, because some knowledge was buried deliberately, and in the heart of that ritual, buried beneath layers of myth, lies a terrible truth. The children may not have created the Night King. They may have only awakened him. And so, when he rose from the ground, his eyes glowing with unholy light, it wasn't a monster looking back. It was purpose. It was memory. It was the beginning of a plan so patient, so cold, that it would wait thousands of years just to be complete. A plan we are only just beginning to understand. The Night King wasn't born in darkness. He was forged. And like all ancient weapons, he remembers the hand that shaped him. In the next part of our journey, we'll explore what happened after the ritual, when the Night King first walked the world. But he didn't go to war. He didn't raise armies. He disappeared into the snow for centuries. Why? And what was he waiting for? The next chapter will uncover his long silence and the hidden years that even the children feared to speak of. Because sometimes the most terrifying enemy is the one who does nothing. Part 3. The Years of Silence. Where the Night King went and why it matters. After the ritual, there was no war, no armies, no blood spilled across the snows. He didn't march. He didn't conquer. He vanished. The man once turned into death itself, simply disappeared into the cold. For years, for decades, for centuries. And in that silence, Westeros forgot. But the Night King didn't. He was watching, waiting, listening. Most creatures rise with purpose, with instinct, with need. The dead rise to kill. The living rise to survive. But the Night King, he rose and did nothing. Why? Because silence is not absence. Silence is not weakness. Silence is design. Think about it. The children of the forest created him as a weapon of desperation. But what if he chose to become something more? While the first men warred, while the Andals invaded, while the Targaryens rose and fell, the Night King was somewhere in the far north, out of sight, out of myth, out of time. But not idle. He was studying. He watched the wall being built. He saw the rise of the Night's Watch. He witnessed the shaping of kingdoms, bloodlines, prophecy, and fire. And all the while, he remained silent, because he understood what few did. A single strike at the right moment can undo 10,000 years of history. Where did he go during those centuries? Some say he retreated to the very edge of the world, to the lands of always winter, a place untouched by the sun, a place where no man rules and no map dares to go. But others whisper something more frightening, that he was everywhere, moving through frozen caves, unseen tunnels, forgotten crypts, that the White Walkers were not just his army, but his scouts, his eyes. We think of the Night King as a monster, But what if he was a scholar, a strategist? What if he was gathering knowledge? Magic? Bloodlines? There are old tales north of the wall, tales most Southerners call nonsense, tales of strange lights in the trees, footsteps in the snow with no sound, children who disappeared in the night, only to return, not quite the same. These weren't random hauntings. They were trials, small, quiet experiments, signs that the Night King was perfecting his resurrection magic long before we ever saw it at Hardhome. And then there's the most chilling possibility of all, that he was searching for something or someone. He marked Bran for a reason. He stared down Jon Snow more than once. He never raised a hand to Samwell Tarly. He allowed key figures to live, even when he had them surrounded. Why? What if he wasn't just building an army? What if he was searching for a very specific lineage? The Starks, the Targaryens, the blood of the first men, and the blood of dragons. If you were the Night King, and you had thousands of years to wait, wouldn't you want to understand your enemies? Wouldn't you want to study what made them dangerous? To learn their movements, their alliances, their vulnerabilities? That's not the behavior of a monster. That's the behavior of a mind. And then, something changed. After thousands of years of silence, he began to move. He converted Craster's sons. He built an army of the dead, body by body, with terrifying patience. He hunted the three-eyed raven. He marked Bran Stark. He destroyed the wall. Every step, deliberate. Every strike, precise. Like pieces on a board moving toward checkmate. We were told this was the long night returning. But perhaps this was the only night that ever truly mattered. The rest? A rehearsal? Because while the living bickered over thrones and crowns, the Night King played a longer game, and now, looking back, the silence was the loudest part of his story. In the next part, we'll explore the creation of the White Walkers themselves. Who are they? Are they mindless followers or fallen kings? Were they once brothers of the Night's Watch, or something even darker? Because the Night King doesn't just create soldiers, he creates reflections. Part 4. The White Walkers. Who they were before death. They don't speak. They don't bleed. They don't hesitate. They move like shadows, strike like blades, obey without question. But beneath the icy armor, behind the glowing blue eyes, lies a question that has haunted scholars, watchers, and dreamers for centuries. Who were the White Walkers before they fell? Because monsters are rarely born. They are made, and no creature ever made is made by accident. The Night King doesn't raise whites in the same way he creates White Walkers. Whites are corpses, mindless, reanimated husks, pawns. But the White Walkers? They're different. They're intelligent. They wield weapons of enchanted ice. They have hierarchy. They think. This suggests something disturbing. They weren't just pulled from the ground. They were chosen, hand-picked, transformed. And the question is, from what? Some believe they were created from the sons of Craster, the wildling who gave his newborn boys to the White Walkers, deep in the haunted woods, far beyond the wall. Craster claimed he had the Night King's favor, but favor always comes with a price. We saw one such child, taken by the Walkers, eyes wide with fear, placed on a cold altar in a frozen spire. And then, touched, the blue eyes opened. The child was gone. In his place stood something else, something eternal. But let's look deeper. These aren't just ice demons, they are knights. They fight with skill, they act with discipline, they move as if they remember what it meant to be human, and still chose something else. This raises a possibility that few have dared to speak aloud. What if the White Walkers weren't just Craster's children? What if some of them were men? Picture it. Thousands of years ago, during the wars between the first men and the children, or even during the Age of Heroes, a pact is made. A group of warriors, fierce, proud, bound to the north, choose to cross a line no one else would. to serve the Night King, to become his vassals, to be transformed. Why? For immortality? For revenge? For power? Or because they believed in his cause? Think of the Night's Watch. Their oath is ancient, their sacrifice is total. But what if the first White Walkers were once brothers of that ancient watch? What if the original Night's Watch was divided, not just by loyalty, but by belief? One side kept the wall, the other side became the storm. And here's where it gets even darker. There's a legend in the old texts, long dismissed by the maesters, of the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, who fell in love with a woman made of ice. He brought her back to the wall, crowned himself king, and ruled with her in darkness until his name was wiped from every record. Some say he was slain. Others believe he became the Night King. But what if it wasn't just him? What if his sworn brothers followed him into that icy union? What if his inner circle, the most loyal men of the Night's Watch, chose to walk beyond death? That would mean the White Walkers are not just soldiers. They're knights of an ancient betrayal. We think of the White Walkers as inhuman. But what if they remember who they once were? That would explain their discipline, their patience, their pride. They don't just follow the Night King, they respect him. Because once, long ago, they may have stood beside him as men, and now they walk the frozen path as something more. Even their weapons tell a story. Swords that can shatter steel, spears that burn like cold fire, armor that glistens like frozen tears. These are not the tools of beasts. These are relics, crafted, forged, passed down, from warrior to warlord to wraith. There's another theory, more ancient, more terrifying, that the White Walkers are fallen kings, rulers who struck a deal with the Night King in exchange for eternal dominion. But every crown has a cost. In life, they ruled lands. In death, they ruled death itself. And yet, they never speak. Because once you accept the Night King's gift, you lose your voice, not your will, not your mind, but your voice. Because only one voice matters now, his. Each White Walker is a piece of a greater design, a reflection of the Night King's own memory. They are not clones, they are not mistakes. They are chosen souls, given a second life, in exchange for their humanity. In the next part, we'll explore what makes the Night King so much more than just a commander. Why he doesn't speak. Why he doesn't feel. Why, in the face of fire, he doesn't flinch. Because death isn't his power. Death is his language. Part 5. The Language of Death. Why the Night King never spoke. He stood at the edge of the world, surrounded by death, with eyes that burned cold blue. He raised the dead with a single gesture, shattered armies with silence, and met his enemies not with fury or commands, but with nothing at all. Not once did he speak, not a whisper, not a war cry, not even a name. And yet, somehow, the world listened. It's easy to assume silence means emptiness, but in the case of the Night King, it meant dominance. He didn't need to speak because everything he wanted was already understood. His army followed, his enemies feared, and the winds themselves bent to his presence. But why stay silent in a world built on oaths, declarations, and prophecy? What was he hiding behind that cold stillness? To understand the weight of his silence, we must look deeper than language. In Westeros, every power uses speech. Kings shout from thrones, red priests chant in fire, maesters record history with ink. Magic itself is often spoken, shaped by Valyrian incantations or whispered prayers. The Night King's silence, then, isn't a lack, it's rejection. A rejection of every system the living rely on. He doesn't need language because death has its own. A language older than words, buried beneath ice and time. A language you feel when your breath freezes mid-sentence, when your heartbeat slows, when the world turns still and you know something has arrived that cannot be reasoned with. The Night King speaks in moments, in gesture, in consequence. When he raises the dead, it's not a command, it's a statement. This is what you are now. This is your final truth. You belong to me. And perhaps that's the most terrifying part. He communicates purely through control. No promises, no lies, just inevitability. Some scholars speculate that the Night King, like the children of the forest, once used a magical language tied to nature itself. If that's true, his silence may not be silence at all. It may be the absence of something once lost. A voice that was stripped away the moment dragonglass pierced his heart. A price for power, or perhaps a lock to prevent the world from hearing the truth he now carries. Others suggest that the Night King's silence is a form of power in itself, because words can be challenged, debated, undone. But silence? Silence endures. Silence cannot be refuted. And in that silence, he becomes a force of nature, not a man. Like winter, he arrives without justification. Like the cold, he cannot be reasoned with. Then there's another theory, one far more disturbing. What if he remembers how to speak but chooses not to? What if he has stood quietly all these centuries, not because he cannot speak, but because there's nothing left to say? Perhaps he watched the world long enough to see the futility of words. Perhaps he heard 1,000 leaders lie, 1,000 kings fall, and decided that speech was just another weakness of the living. His silence becomes a mirror, reflecting the noise of the world back at itself. Every shout from the Iron Throne, every scream on the battlefield, every promise broken by man after man, all of it collapses in the face of his cold quiet. He does not speak because he does not beg. He does not plead, command, or negotiate. He simply takes. And the only thing louder than his silence is what comes after: destruction, reanimation, submission. But here's where things get even stranger. There were moments, key moments, where the Night King looked directly at certain characters, locking eyes not like a mindless force, but like something aware. Jon Snow, Bran Stark, Daenerys. These weren't random encounters. These were deliberate, calculating stares. And in those moments, many viewers expected him to finally say something, to reveal a hidden truth, a prophecy, a name. But he never did, because maybe words would humanize him. And the Night King isn't meant to be human. He's not just death. He's the idea that death cannot be reasoned with, that there is no conversation at the end, no negotiation, no redemption, only silence. Yet even now, we wonder what might have happened if he had spoken. What language would he have used? What would his voice have sounded like? Would it have echoed like breaking ice? Or would it have sounded like our own? Because in the end, the Night King might be more familiar than we think. He might be us, with every lie stripped away, every word burned by truth, every illusion frozen and shattered. His silence might not be empty. It might be honest. And that's what makes it unbearable. In the next chapter, we'll explore his connection to Bran Stark, the boy who became the three-eyed raven, the memory of the world, and possibly its greatest threat. Were they enemies or two sides of the same ancient force? Did the Night King hunt Bran, or was he trying to return to him? Part 6. The Night King and Bran Stark. The Mirror and the Mark. At first glance, Bran Stark and the Night King appear to be complete opposites. One is a crippled boy, quiet and thoughtful, forced to see the world from the shadows of history, chosen to become the memory of humanity as the three-eyed raven. The other is a towering, silent god of ice, a weapon built from pain and ancient magic, who brings only forgetting. One preserves the past, the other wipes it away. But the deeper you go, the more you begin to realize that their roles are not so different. In fact, they may be two sides of the same story. Maybe they aren't just opposing forces, they're bound. Reflections, mirrors. Bran doesn't live in time the way others do. He isn't tied to the present. He's become untethered, watching everything, past, present, and future, like it's already happened. He slips through the memories of the world as if they were pages in a book. But somewhere along the way, he looked too deep. He touched something older than memory, and it touched him back. The Night King is the only figure in the entire series who sees Bran while he's inside a vision. Not just vaguely aware, he sees him, turns his head, looks directly at him, and then does the impossible. He reaches out and marks him. Bran wakes up, horrified. But what he may not have realized is that it wasn't just a mark on his skin. It was a connection, a lock, a door that had been opened and could never be closed again. After that moment, the cave where the three-eyed raven hid for 1,000 years was no longer protected. The ancient magic failed. The children of the forest died. Leaf, the last of their kind, sacrificed herself trying to stop the Night King's army from reaching Bran. But none of it worked because the Night King didn't need directions. He was already inside, already linked. The question is, how? How could the Night King access the same realm of visions, the same magical network rooted in the weirwood trees and the old blood of the first men? Unless he was part of it all along. Unless the dragon glass that was stabbed into his heart, the very tool that created him, tied him directly to the source of ancient green seer magic. The same source that Bran uses. It would mean they are both connected to the same web of memory, both using it, both drawing from the same current. But while Bran is the memory of the living, the Night King is the memory of the dead. Cold, unchanging, relentless. If one side remembers to preserve, the other remembers only to erase. And in that erasure, there is silence. No lies, no songs, no oaths, just stillness. But there's a theory, darker than the rest, that turns everything upside down. What if Bran Stark isn't just connected to the Night King? What if Bran is the Night King? Not metaphorically, literally? The theory suggests that in his attempt to stop the Long Night before it ever began, Bran traveled too far back in time. He warged into the human man who was about to be turned by the children of the forest. Maybe he thought he could change something, influence the event. But when the dragon glass was plunged into the man's heart, Bran's consciousness became trapped. And over centuries, as that man transformed into something else, Bran's identity slowly eroded. Lost, forgotten, replaced by the cold, by silence. If this is true, then the Night King is not just a villain. He's Bran's failure, a ghost of a choice made too long ago. And maybe that's why the Night King walks directly toward Bran in the final battle, not to kill him, but to return to him, to complete the loop, to end what Bran unknowingly began. Even if you reject that theory, their mirrored behavior is impossible to ignore. Both of them are emotionless, still, distant from those around them. Bran no longer speaks like a boy. He speaks like a being outside of time. He tells people exactly what will happen, but never why. He doesn't intervene. He doesn't cry. He barely even says goodbye. He just watches. The Night King does the same. His face never changes. He doesn't kill out of anger or pleasure. He simply moves forward, without cruelty, without mercy. They both observe. They both wait. They both know more than they say. And then there's the question of targeting. Why does the Night King go past Jon Snow, past Daenerys, past all the warriors and heroes, and walk straight toward Bran? Why is Bran the final target? It's not vengeance. It's not personal. It's something else. It's like watching two fragments of a broken entity returning to the same point. Maybe the Night King's mission wasn't to end the world. Maybe it was to end memory, because memory keeps the cycle going. Memory creates vengeance, honor, betrayal, rebellion, prophecy. Without memory, the game stops, the board freezes, and winter wins. The moment he marked Bran, it wasn't just a scar, it was an anchor point. The Night King found the source of all memory and decided that it had to end. And Bran let him come, because maybe Bran knew, maybe he always knew, And that's where the real mystery lives, not in what the Night King was trying to do, but in what Bran was allowing to happen. Was it all destiny? Was it manipulation? Or was it a test? Perhaps we'll never know if the Night King and Bran are one soul fractured by time or just two beings molded by the same magic. But the truth is, they were never at war the way we thought. Not fire versus ice, not hero versus villain. What we witnessed was something deeper, memory versus oblivion, a boy who became history, and a king who wanted to erase it. And for a moment, under the heart tree at Winterfell, they stood together, not as enemies, but as echoes. Part 7, The Fire That Didn't Burn. What magic the Night King truly wields. There are moments in the Game of Thrones universe that leave you gasping, questioning everything you thought you knew. And then there's the moment the Night King steps into the fire. Fire, the ancient force that destroyed the others, that forged the Targaryens' power, that killed the most dangerous enemies of mankind. Fire is the symbol of life, rebirth, and destruction. It is the very thing that should have incinerated the Night King on contact, reducing him to ash. And yet, when Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen, and the entire army of Winterfell faced the Night King, standing before a circle of dragonfire, he didn't burn. The Night King walked through the flames as if they were nothing, his body untouched, his presence undiminished. Not a single spark, not a single flicker. So what does this mean? What magic does the Night King possess? And how is he so different from any other creature we've seen in Westeros, including the other whites who burn and crumble when touched by fire? The theory that emerges from this moment is one that cracks the foundations of everything we understand about magic in the world of Game of Thrones. The Night King doesn't just survive fire, he is immune to it. But why? What kind of magic could allow a being of ice to withstand the very force that should obliterate him? The answer lies in a theory that goes beyond the physical. The Night King isn't just some mindless servant of death. He is the embodiment of something much older, much darker. He is a force of nature, but not in the way we understand forces like fire and ice. The Night King is not made of simple ice. He is a creature of magic, ancient, primal magic that exists on a different plane than the fire that burns from the world of men. When the children of the forest created him, they didn't just create a being of ice, they bound him with the magic of the first men. He was born of a ritual that touched the very essence of life and death itself. But there's something else at play here. Perhaps it's not the fire itself that the Night King is immune to, but rather the force of life that it represents. Fire, in many ancient traditions, is not just a destructive force. It is the force that burns away the old, making room for the new. And the Night King is not new. He is the old, the primeval. He doesn't need rebirth because he has already seen everything. Fire might be the force that brings life and change, but the Night King doesn't change. He simply exists, and the world must bend to his will. Think about how the Night King's forces move. The whites he commands aren't just mindless zombies, they are an extension of his will, an extension of his frozen magic. The way they attack, the way they behave, the way they never stop, it's as if they are not governed by the laws of life at all. They don't need warmth, they don't need rest, they just continue, forever. What's strange is that the whites are almost like shadows of the living, copies of the dead. They exist only to erase everything that was, and that might be why fire, a force that symbolizes the energy of life, does nothing against them. But the Night King? He's not just any white. He is the master of the whites, the force behind their existence. And his magic goes beyond their capabilities. He is a being of memory and time, bound to a different cycle. A cycle where fire doesn't have the same effect. A cycle where the laws of nature are rewritten. And when dragonfire does nothing to him, it means that he isn't just a force of ice. He's something much older. Something that doesn't belong to the natural order of the world. It's almost as if the Night King is the living embodiment of the long night itself, the time before time, a time before the suns rose and the world was bathed in fire. What if the Night King is the physical manifestation of the first darkness, the primal void that existed before light, before warmth, before the gods of fire came to shape the world? This theory is supported by the way the Night King's magic interacts with the world. It doesn't just freeze, it stagnates. Time stands still in the presence of the Night King. The air grows heavy, the world feels suffocating. When he touches something, it's not simply frozen. It's lost, as though it is caught in a moment that no longer exists. The fire that should burn him represents the chaos of life, of change, and he is above it. His magic is the absence of change. It is the stillness of time, the silence of eternal winter. But why does the Night King need to walk through fire at all? What does it mean that he seems so drawn to it? After all, it's not the fire that hurts him, it's the dragon's breath. Perhaps the dragon fire is special in its own way. It's the product of both fire and ice. The breath of dragons comes from the heart of the world. It's the magic of the ancients, a force that binds the elements together, the fire of the Targaryens and the blood of dragons. The Night King isn't immune to this fire because it's simply flame. It's immune because it is magical fire, a fire that exists outside the natural laws. A fire that can break the spell the Night King is bound to. That's why the Night King feared the dragons more than anything else. They are the only true threat to him, the only power that can stand against his ancient, boundless magic. So when the Night King faced the dragonfire in the battle at Winterfell, we weren't just witnessing a battle of fire versus ice. We were witnessing a clash of ancient primordial magics, magic that the Night King has no control over. And in that moment, we saw just how vulnerable the Night King truly is, not to fire, but to the deeper forces of the world. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into the significance of the Night King's creation. Who exactly were the children of the forest? Why did they create him? What was their original plan, and what went wrong? And more importantly, was the Night King created to fight a greater evil than even the forces of fire and ice? Stay tuned. Part 8. The Children of the Forest. Why the Night King was born. The Children of the Forest. For centuries, they were seen as nothing more than legends, strange, ancient creatures who lived in the shadows of the world, practicing magic older than time itself. But when we finally see them on screen, when we realize their connection to the Night King, we're forced to confront the terrifying truth. They didn't just exist, they created him. They didn't merely summon him into being, they gave birth to the very monster that would bring about their own downfall. But why? What drove the children of the forest to create something so deadly, something so violent, that it would lead to the destruction of everything they had once held dear? To understand this, we need to look deep into the past. Long before the arrival of the first men or the building of the wall, before the dragons burned their way through the skies, the children of the forest lived in harmony with nature. They were the true custodians of the old magic, keepers of the weirwood trees, which were the very essence of their power. But harmony is fragile, and as history shows, it often doesn't take much to shatter it. When the first men arrived in Westeros, the children of the forest initially tried to live in peace with them. They welcomed the newcomers, sharing their ancient knowledge of the land. But this peace was short-lived. The first men, with their iron weapons and destructive ways, began to clear the forests and chop down the sacred weirwood trees. They didn't understand the power they were disturbing, and they didn't care. The children of the forest, seeing their sacred trees fall, understood they were in danger. The first men were not just a threat to the trees, they were a threat to everything the children stood for. Their world was crumbling, and with it, the very magic that kept them alive. So the children of the forest turned to desperate measures. They knew their time was running out. In their desperation, they turned to darker, more powerful forms of magic. They needed to find a way to protect themselves, to fight back against the growing human threat. And that's when they created the Night King. But here's the terrifying twist. What if the Night King was never meant to be a weapon of destruction? What if he was intended to be a protector, a guardian of their way of life, created to fight against the first men, to prevent the sacred forests from being desecrated, to preserve the magic of the old world? Imagine this. The children of the forest, so deeply connected to the land, created a warrior who would defend the very thing that gave them power. They used ancient magic, a combination of their own powers and the dragon glass they had discovered, to transform a man into something else, a creature with the strength and durability to withstand the first men's onslaught. He was the perfect soldier, a being made of ice and magic, a weapon that could never be defeated. But something went horribly wrong. The magic that the children used was too powerful, too primal. It corrupted the very thing it was meant to protect. The Night King became more than just a guardian. He became a conqueror. He was no longer the protector of the forests. He became the master of death itself. The very magic that was supposed to save the children of the forest ended up becoming their curse. The Night King turned on his creators, the children, wiping out their race, erasing them from history. They thought they could control the power of the ancient magic, but they couldn't. In the end, they paid the ultimate price for their hubris. The Night King is a symbol of their failure, a creature born of desperation, of an attempt to fight fire with fire. But instead of protecting the forests, he became the embodiment of everything they had feared, the destruction of their world. The children of the forest, in trying to defend themselves, unleashed a terror they couldn't control. This raises another haunting question. Did they foresee this? Did the children of the forest know what they were creating, or were they too blinded by their own desperation to see the consequences of their actions? There's evidence that they may have been aware of the Night King's potential for destruction. They didn't just create him, they bound him with magic. They made him part of their world in a way no one could have predicted. The fact that they didn't see the disaster unfolding speaks to the darkness of their choices. But that brings us to the real mystery at the heart of it all. The Night King was never just a weapon created by the children of the forest. He was a creation of their own sins, a warning, a reminder of what happens when desperation clouds judgment, when the desire to protect leads to the creation of something that can never be tamed. The Night King is the culmination of everything they feared and everything they allowed to happen. They wanted to protect their world, but in doing so, they created the force that would bring about its destruction. And that leads us to a terrifying possibility. The Night King wasn't just a tool of the children of the forest. He was their legacy, a warning to anyone who thinks they can control the forces of magic, a reminder that no one, not even the most ancient beings, can control the tide of time. They may have created the Night King in an attempt to stop the first men, but in the end, they unleashed the greatest evil the world would ever know. And with it, they sealed their own doom. So when we look at the Night King, we're not just seeing a force of nature, we're seeing the final result of the children of the forest's mistakes, their greatest regret. And as the winds of winter blow across the land, we realize that the Night King's reign was never just about ice. It was about the cost of meddling with powers too ancient to understand. The next question is even more disturbing. If the children of the forest could create the Night King, what else could they have created? And more importantly, what are the consequences of meddling with magic that is older than time itself? Part 9. The Man Who Became the Night King. Before he was the Night King, before he became the embodiment of death and ice, he was a man with a name, a past, and perhaps even a sense of purpose. But who was this man? What could have happened to him that transformed him into the fearsome creature we now know as the Night King? The answer to this question is as elusive as the very character of the Night King himself. We never learn the name of the man he once was. We don't know where he came from or what kind of life he lived. All we know is that he was a human, one of the first men, and he was chosen for something extraordinary. But why him? Why was he the one the children of the forest selected? Some believe the man who became the Night King was a leader, a warrior who fought for his people during the wars against the children of the forest. Perhaps he was a figure of great importance, someone who stood out among the first men. Others suggest that he might have been an outcast, a lone figure whose bitterness and rage made him the perfect vessel for the dark magic that would turn him into the Night King. There's even a theory that he was a traitor, someone who betrayed his own people, making him the perfect candidate to wield the power of the children's magic. But we must remember that the Night King wasn't just chosen at random. The children of the forest didn't simply pick anyone for their dark experiment. They selected a man with specific qualities, a man who could endure the transformation into something far beyond human. But what was the catalyst for his change? What drove him to accept the transformation? Was it fear? Was it a desire for power? Or was it something even darker? The theories here are as endless as the questions they raise. One possibility is that the Night King was once a leader in the battle against the children of the forest. Perhaps in his quest to win the war and save his people, he was drawn into the children's ancient, powerful magic. Maybe he was lured into their ritual under the false belief that it would give him the strength he needed to defeat them. He could have been promised victory, immortality, and the power to end the conflict once and for all. But in the end, he paid the price for his ambition. And what did the children of the forest gain by choosing him? Did they see something in him that others didn't? Was he somehow different from the other men of his time? The theory that stands out is that the children of the forest didn't just want to create a powerful weapon. They wanted to imbue the man with the ability to control the very forces of nature: ice, death, time, magic beyond comprehension. They needed a vessel strong enough to carry this burden, a vessel that could withstand the immense power that would come with it. But there's a deeper, more chilling possibility. What if the Night King was not chosen by the children of the forest at all? What if he was chosen by something else, something far darker? Could it be that the Night King's transformation was not just the result of magic, but of his own choices? What if he was so consumed by the desire for power that he willingly gave himself over to the darkness, even when he knew the consequences? What if the man who became the Night King wasn't forced into this fate, but chose it? This theory paints a much more terrifying picture. It suggests that the Night King was not simply a victim of the children's magic. He may have been complicit in his own transformation. He could have embraced the ice and death because he believed it was the only way to gain ultimate control. After all, what could be more powerful than the ability to command the forces of life and death themselves? But there's more to consider. The very idea that the Night King was once a man, a human, adds another layer of complexity to his character. He is not merely an unfeeling monster, a puppet of the children of the forest. He was once someone who could think, feel, and make choices. What kind of choices could lead a man to become the living embodiment of death? And once he made that choice, did he ever regret it? Did he ever long for the humanity he had lost? Perhaps in his darkest moments, the Night King remembers the man he used to be. The man who had hopes, dreams, and a future. But as time passed and his transformation continued, his humanity slowly slipped away, leaving behind only the cold, remorseless creature we now know. The essence of the man was consumed by the magic, his soul lost to the relentless ice. Yet, some theories suggest that the Night King's true power lies in his ability to remember. What if buried deep within him, he still carries fragments of his past life? What if the memories of the man he was still exist, locked away, fighting to be freed? The Night King is not just an agent of death, he is also a prisoner of his own making. He is the perfect paradox, a creature who controls the dead, yet is himself bound to a past he can never escape. And in this lies perhaps the most important mystery of all. Does the Night King want to remain as he is? Does he choose to live in the cold, lifeless void, or is he simply a shadow of a man who never had a choice in the first place? If he had the chance to return to his former self, would he? Or has he become so consumed by the power of ice and death that he no longer remembers what it means to be human? In the next part, we'll explore the Night King's true purpose. What was his ultimate goal? Was he simply a tool of the children of the forest, or did he have plans of his own? Why did he rise from the ashes of his past, and what was he trying to accomplish when he set out to conquer the world? Part 10. The Night King's True Purpose Beyond the Ice. The Night King is often seen as an unstoppable force, a monster of pure death, bent on destroying the living. But what if his true purpose wasn't simply to end humanity? What if his icy reign was a much more complex, even tragic pursuit? What if the Night King had a goal that transcended mere conquest, one that could reveal a deeper, more unsettling truth about his existence? When we look at the Night King, it's easy to assume he is driven only by destruction, by his insatiable desire to extinguish all life. After all, he is the leader of the White Walkers, the commander of the dead, and the embodiment of winter itself. His army sweeps across the land, turning everything in its path to ice, leaving nothing but frozen corpses and despair. Yet beneath this cold exterior lies something more, a purpose that goes far beyond simple annihilation. Consider the way the Night King acts throughout the series. He doesn't just kill for the sake of killing. He moves deliberately, often avoiding direct confrontation when it's not necessary. He doesn't attack indiscriminately. His goals are far more calculated. When he does strike, it's with a chilling precision, as if he's following a plan. So what is this plan? What drives him? One of the most perplexing aspects of the Night King is his strange obsession with Bran Stark. The Night King's pursuit of Bran isn't just a random attack, it's deliberate, personal, even meaningful. The Night King seems to understand that Bran is more than just a boy. Bran holds knowledge and power that could be the key to unlocking his true purpose. But why? What is it about Bran that makes him such an important target for the Night King? This brings us to a theory that has been growing in popularity. What if the Night King's ultimate goal isn't just to kill, but to rewrite history itself? What if the Night King isn't seeking to destroy the world, but to undo the world that exists? Could the Night King be trying to return to a time before the rise of men, before the creation of the Wall, before the coming of the first men and the children of the forest? What if his true goal is to take the world back to an earlier age, an age where the children of the forest reigned supreme, before the power of the first men corrupted everything? This theory suggests that the Night King's attack on Bran isn't just about killing him, it's about stopping the future from happening. Bran, as the three-eyed raven, has the ability to see into the past, the present, and the future. Bran is not just a threat to the Night King because he can foresee the coming battle, but because he represents the key to understanding the future, a future the Night King wants to erase. If the Night King succeeds in eliminating Bran, he would prevent the world from evolving as it is, thus erasing the current timeline and returning the world to the way it was before the rise of men. This would explain why the Night King is so relentless in his pursuit. He is not just trying to destroy the living, he is trying to prevent the future. In his mind, the future represents the mistakes of the past, the mistakes of the first men and the children of the forest, and he believes that erasing it is the only way to return to a more harmonious, pure time. But here's the ultimate question. Is this really about the past, or is it about the Night King himself? Could the Night King's true purpose be more personal than we think? What if the Night King is not just trying to undo the world, but is trying to change his own fate? What if his journey is not about defeating mankind, but about finding a way to redeem himself or to escape the prison of ice that holds him captive? When we think of the Night King, we often think of him as a force of nature, a creature born from ancient magic and bound to an eternal curse. But what if this curse is not as permanent as we believe? What if the Night King is searching for a way to end his own existence or to break free from the icy prison that binds him? Perhaps his attacks are a cry for release, a desperate attempt to end the cycle of death and destruction that he is trapped in. If we accept this theory, then the Night King's pursuit of Bran makes even more sense. Bran, with his ability to see the past and future, could hold the key to ending the Night King's curse. Perhaps Bran represents the only person who could help the Night King break free from the chains of his own creation, freeing him from the endless winter. This idea introduces a chilling possibility. The Night King may not be the villain we think he is. He could be a tragic figure, a prisoner of his own power, seeking redemption or release from his own torment. Yet another layer of mystery comes into play when we consider the origin of the Night King's power. Could his creation have been part of a larger cosmic plan? Is he, in some sense, a force that exists not only to destroy, but also to balance the world? In many ancient cultures, forces of destruction and creation are often intertwined. One cannot exist without the other. Could it be that the Night King is not merely a villain, but a necessary force created to restore balance to a world that is out of harmony? If the Night King is indeed a force of balance, his purpose might not be as simple as the destruction of humanity. He could be playing a larger, more complex role in the shaping of history, a role that involves both death and rebirth, destruction and creation, darkness and light. His ultimate goal could be to restore balance in a way that we, as viewers, can't yet fully understand. But is he truly the destroyer, or is he simply the harbinger of a new era? An era where the old world dies, making way for a new one. The Night King may not be the end of the world, but the beginning of something else entirely. Part 11. The Night King's Army, the Secret of the White Walkers. The Night King's army is unlike any other in history. It is an army not of men, but of the dead, not of flesh, but of ice and shadow. And yet, within this frozen legion lies a secret, a mystery that no one has truly understood. Who are these beings, these White Walkers, and how are they connected to the Night King's reign of terror? What makes them so terrifying, so relentless, and what is the true nature of their power? At first glance, the White Walkers seem like simple soldiers, creatures of ice and death, created to serve the Night King's will. They are relentless, unyielding, and merciless. They kill without hesitation, turning their victims into more of their own kind, slowly building an unstoppable army. But as we dig deeper into the lore, we begin to realize that the White Walkers are not just mindless automatons. They are far more than that. They are changed beings, caught between life and death, bound to the will of the Night King, but also carrying with them an unsettling mystery. The most obvious question is, of course, where did they come from? How were they created, and why? While it is clear that the children of the forest played a key role in the creation of the Night King, the origins of the White Walkers remain a bit more obscure. We know that the children used powerful magic, dark magic, to transform the Night King into the being he became. But did they create the White Walkers in the same way? Or is there something else at play here? Some theories suggest that the White Walkers were created as part of the Night King's creation, born of the same magic that transformed him. If this is true, then it means the White Walkers are not merely soldiers. They are part of the same essence as the Night King himself. They are not human, not fully alive, but something entirely different, a twisted reflection of what they once were. Yet there's an eerie sense that the White Walkers are more than just the creations of the Night King. They seem to have their own intelligence, their own purpose, and their own will. Unlike the Whites, the reanimated corpses that are raised by the White Walkers to fight for them, the White Walkers are cold, calculating, and at times seem to act independently. It's as though they are driven by something deeper, a purpose that goes beyond serving their master. In one of the most chilling moments of the series, we see the White Walkers, led by the Night King, make their way toward the wall. But it's not just about crossing the wall. They are trying to tear down the barrier that has kept the undead from entering the realms of the living. The White Walkers are not merely soldiers, they are the harbingers of the end of all things, the vanguard of an apocalypse that has been set in motion long before the rise of the Night King. Their army is not just an instrument of destruction, it is the means to bring about the long-foretold long night, an age of eternal winter, when the world would be plunged into darkness. The whites that the White Walkers command are, in essence, the army of death itself. They are the bodies of the dead, reanimated by the White Walkers' icy magic, and they do the bidding of their cold masters without question. They march, they kill, they destroy, and with each life they take, their ranks swell until the army becomes an unstoppable force. But the true secret of the White Walkers lies in their power to raise the dead. This ability is what makes them so terrifying. It's not just that they kill, it's that they never stop. Each victim they claim becomes part of their army. This is the Night King's most terrifying weapon, the ability to turn life into death, to turn every death into a new soldier. Each time a white falls in battle, it is resurrected as part of the growing army, making the White Walkers an ever-expanding force. But the true question that haunts us is why the Night King created the White Walkers in the first place. Was their purpose to serve him in his war against the living, or was there something more? Were they created to be more than just tools of war? Some theories suggest that the White Walkers were meant to guard the balance of the world, to act as protectors, to keep the forces of life and death in check. They could be seen as guardians of the threshold between life and death, and in this sense, they may not be purely evil in their creation, even if their actions are terrifying. But there's a far darker possibility. What if the White Walkers were created as part of a cosmic plan to cleanse the world, to rid it of the corruption that has taken root since the first men arrived? The White Walkers may not be the villains we think they are. They could be the harbingers of necessary destruction. Their purpose may be to reset the world, to wipe the slate clean so that a new age can begin, free from the mistakes of the past. This idea brings with it a troubling question. If the White Walkers were created for such a purpose, does this mean they are simply pawns in a much larger game? Are they being controlled by forces beyond the Night King himself? Forces that seek to reshape the world according to a grand, cosmic design? If so, then the Night King's army might not just be an instrument of death. It could be a tool for rebirth. The Night King's army is the catalyst for a new age, one in which the living and the dead are intertwined in a way we can hardly comprehend. In the end, the true nature of the White Walkers may be more than we can fully grasp. Are they simply the servants of the Night King, or are they something more ancient, more powerful, and more mysterious? Do they serve a purpose beyond what we understand, a purpose that transcends even the Night King's desire for conquest? As we continue our journey, the next question we must ask is, what happens when the Night King's army reaches the living? Will the living survive, or is this truly the end? Part 12. The Long Night, What It Means for the Future. The Long Night. A name whispered in fear, a phrase that has haunted the people of Westeros for generations. It is more than just a legend, it is a prophecy, a harbinger of doom that has been passed down through the ages. The Long Night is not merely a season of harsh winter. It is the final confrontation between light and dark, between life and death. And with the Night King's return, that long-forgotten prophecy is finally coming to fruition. When the Night King first rose, the ancient threat of the Long Night was rekindled. It is a terrifying idea, an age where the sun itself will be blotted out, plunging the world into eternal darkness and freezing everything in its path. The very concept of the Long Night is not just a historical event. It is a cycle, a recurring nightmare that the people of Westeros have long feared would return. And now, it has. The Night King, with his army of whites and White Walkers, brings with him the promise of a new, long night, a time when the living will face extinction at the hands of death itself. But what does this mean for the future of Westeros? What happens to the world when the long night finally comes to pass? Is it the end, or could it be something more? A dark rebirth. Theories about the future have emerged, and some are more optimistic than others. But one thing is certain: the world as we know it is about to change forever. One theory suggests that the long night is not merely a death sentence, but rather the cleansing of the world, a necessary destruction of the corruptions that have plagued the realm for centuries. The first men, the children of the forest, and even the Targaryens with their dragons all have left their mark on Westeros. But what if these marks are not meant to last? What if the return of the Night King and the Long Night is a way for the world to reset itself, to erase the mistakes of the past and start anew? The Night King, in this sense, could be seen as an instrument of fate, a necessary evil designed to restore balance to the world. The first long night was a time of chaos, but it was also a time of change, a time when the old ways gave way to the new. Perhaps in this new age, the living and the dead must coexist, and the world must evolve into something unrecognizable. The destruction of the living may not be an end, but a rebirth, a way for the world to shed its old skin and embrace something different, something stronger. But this theory does not come without its dark implications. If the Night King's purpose is truly to reset the world, to begin a new cycle, it would mean that life as we know it is expendable. The living in this vision are nothing more than a phase in the cycle of existence. Once that phase ends, the world must move on to the next stage. It's a chilling thought, the idea that the lives of billions of people are nothing more than a moment in a much larger, more impersonal cycle of existence. The Night King is the harbinger of that end, the living embodiment of the death that is necessary for rebirth. But is it possible that the Night King's mission is not just about destruction? Could there be a greater purpose at work here? What if the long night isn't just about the death of humanity, but about something even more profound, a universal change that affects the very fabric of reality itself? Could the Night King be attempting to break the cycle of life and death altogether? What if his ultimate goal is to turn the world into something entirely different, a place where life and death no longer have meaning, where the lines between the two are blurred beyond recognition? Some theories suggest that the Night King is not merely seeking to kill. He is trying to reshape the world itself, to create a new existence where the rules of the past no longer apply. If he succeeds in bringing about the long night, it could signal the beginning of a new age, one in which death is eternal, but life is transformed. This idea presents a terrifying possibility, a world where death is no longer feared, but embraced, where the living are constantly reborn as whites, their souls lost but their bodies kept as soldiers for the Night King's army. But there's an even more unsettling question that arises from the idea of the long night. What if the long night is not the end at all? What if it's just a transition, a dark, harrowing passage that leads to something far worse? In the lore of Westeros, there are whispers of a greater darkness that lies beyond the long night, a force that could bring an even greater disaster to the world than anything the Night King could ever bring. Some speak of a shadowy entity, an ancient evil far older than the gods themselves, one that has been lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Could the Night King be merely a pawn in a much larger game? Could he be a precursor to something worse? If the long night is a prophecy, then what lies beyond it may be something even more terrifying than the eternal winter the Night King brings. The future of Westeros is now in question. The long night is not just a moment in time, it is a reckoning. As the dead rise and the army of the Night King marches forward, the world must face its darkest hour. Will humanity survive, or will the long night plunge the world into eternal darkness? And if humanity does survive, What kind of world will it inherit? A world forever changed by the frozen grip of the Night King. As we continue, we will dive deeper into the future of Westeros, exploring the aftermath of the Long Night and the consequences of the Night King's reign. Part 13. The Aftermath of the Long Night, What Lies Beyond. The Long Night, a terror long foretold, has finally come to pass. The living have fought against it, but what of the aftermath? What happens to the world once the snow settles and the winds of winter die down? The Night King's destruction is not simply a moment of death. It is the culmination of a dark prophecy, and its consequences will echo throughout Westeros for years to come. The world, as we know it, has been irrevocably changed. The lands are scarred, the people are forever altered. The question that now haunts the survivors is, what comes next? After all the bloodshed, all the sacrifices, and the devastating loss, can Westeros ever return to the peace and order it once knew? When the dust settles and the dead are defeated, the realm will be left with the remnants of a war that has redefined the very nature of life and death. The power structures that once dominated Westeros, houses, kings, and queens, are now nothing more than fragile memories. The survivors are left in a broken world where alliances have been torn asunder and old grievances have been magnified by the horrors they've faced. But the question remains, can this shattered world be rebuilt? What will the new Westeros look like in the wake of such a cataclysmic event? The answer is not simple, for the effects of the Long Night are far-reaching, and the changes it brings will not be easy to overcome. First, we must consider the psychological toll the Long Night has taken on the survivors. The people of Westeros have faced horrors unlike any they have ever known. Entire families, communities, and even entire cities have been wiped out by the army of the dead. For those who survive, the trauma of such loss will linger long after the last White has been defeated. How can the living reconcile with the death of so many loved ones? How can they rebuild from the ashes, knowing that the horrors of the dead will always be just a memory away? It's important to understand that survival in this case is not just about defeating the Night King. It's about healing, about learning to live in a world where the very fabric of existence has been torn apart. The survivors will face not only physical rebuilding, but also emotional and spiritual restoration. The memories of the Long Night will haunt them, and the scars left behind by the undead will take generations to fade. The question is, will the survivors even want to rebuild at all? But it's not just the psychological effects that will shape the future. It's the practical consequences of a world that has been fundamentally altered. With the Night King's defeat, the immediate threat of the undead has been eliminated, but the damage done to the realm is irreversible. The infrastructure of Westeros has been devastated. Farms, cities, roads, everything that made the realm function has been destroyed or severely damaged by the White Walkers and their army. The economy, once driven by trade and agriculture, has been shattered. With so much lost, how will the people of Westeros feed and care for themselves? How will they rebuild their societies from the ground up? And then there is the question of political power. The power struggles between the noble houses of Westeros have been ongoing for centuries, but now, with the fall of the old leaders and dynasties, new power vacuums will emerge. Without the looming threat of the Night King and his army, the survivors will be left to face their own internal conflicts. Old alliances may dissolve, and new ones may form. But the question is whether the people will be able to rise above their differences and create something new, or if they will fall back into the old ways of war and bloodshed that have plagued the realm for so long. In this new, fractured world, the survivors must confront a critical question. Who will lead them? The old rulers are gone, and there may not be anyone left who can claim the throne of Westeros with the same authority and strength as before. The power dynamics of the realm have been completely shattered, and the survivors will have to rebuild their governments and institutions from scratch. But beyond the human cost, there is something even darker to consider: What about the remnants of the Night King's influence? The long night may have ended, but what if the Night King's power hasn't been fully eradicated? There are lingering questions about the true nature of his magic. If the Night King could raise the dead and create an army from nothing, what other powers might he have left behind? Could his influence linger even after his destruction? What if his magic is more deeply embedded in the world of Westeros than anyone realizes? There's also the unsettling possibility that the Night King's death was not the final end. What if his destruction was only the beginning of an even darker chapter in the history of Westeros? Could his essence still exist, dormant, waiting for a time when the conditions are right to rise once more? Could a new Night King emerge from the ashes, seeking to complete what the original could not? If this is the case, then the survivors will not only have to deal with the rebuilding of their world, they will also have to prepare for the possibility that the darkness has not yet truly passed. But even in the midst of all this uncertainty, there is hope. The end of the long night marks the beginning of a new era, a time when the survivors can come together and decide the future of their world. They will have the chance to learn from the mistakes of the past, to rebuild from the rubble, and to create a society that is not bound by the bloodshed and cruelty of old. The end of the Night King's reign brings with it the opportunity for a new chapter, one that might, with time, bring peace and prosperity to a war-torn realm. However, the question still lingers. What is the true cost of the long night? The survivors may rebuild, but they will never forget what they've lost, nor the horrors they've faced. The scars left by the undead, by the reign of the Night King, will shape Westeros for generations to come. The world may rise again, but it will never be the same. Part 14. The Final Battle, Confronting the Legacy of the Night King. The long night is over, the battle has been won, and the Night King is no more. Yet, even in the aftermath of his defeat, the world of Westeros remains burdened by an unsettling truth. The legacy of the Night King cannot be so easily erased. His shadow lingers over the realm, casting a dark pall over the future. While the immediate threat has been eliminated, the true cost of the Night King's reign has only just begun to unfold. The question remains: what is the true legacy of the Night King, and what lasting impact will he have on the survivors, the living, and the future of Westeros? In the wake of his death, the survivors are left to pick up the pieces of a world shattered by war, death, and destruction. But as they begin the painful process of rebuilding, they must confront the dark legacy that the Night King has left behind. The scars of the past cannot be easily healed. The psychological wounds of those who lived through the terror of the long night will last long after the last white has fallen. Perhaps the most haunting question is not just what the Night King did, but what he was and why he existed in the first place. Was he truly just a tool of destruction, an evil force created to bring about the end of the world? Or was there something deeper to his existence, something that transcends his role as a simple villain? Was the Night King a creation of the children of the forest, or did he represent something far older, an ancient force tied to the very origins of the world itself? One theory suggests that the Night King was not just a creation of the children of the forest, but a product of a much older, more primal power, a force that has been lying dormant in the world for eons, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Some have speculated that the Night King was a manifestation of the forces of entropy and decay, the inevitable end of all things, a force that exists in opposition to life itself. In this sense, the Night King was not a villain, but a necessary force, fulfilling his role in the cosmic balance. His purpose may have been to bring the world to an end so that a new cycle could begin. If this is the case, then the true legacy of the Night King is not just the destruction he wrought, but the inevitable return of death. Even though he is dead, the force he represents, the force of entropy, will continue to shape the world long after his fall. Death, as the Night King embodied it, will always be a part of the world, a reminder that all things must come to an end. The survivors may rebuild their cities, reforge their alliances, and start new lives, but the shadow of death will always be there, looming in the background, reminding them of the fragility of life. But there is another, more hopeful possibility. The end of the Night King may signal the beginning of a new era, one in which the survivors can break free from the cycle of death and destruction that has plagued their world. In this sense, the true legacy of the Night King could be a lesson, a warning that, while death and darkness are inevitable, they do not define the world. Life can and must continue, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The survivors, though scarred and broken, now have a chance to learn from the mistakes of the past and rebuild a new future. Perhaps, in time, they can create a world where the horrors of the past are no longer a shadow over their lives. The Night King's death may represent the end of one era, but it could also be the start of something new, a future where the living can flourish once more, free from the terror of the dead. Still, the trauma of the long night will not be so easily forgotten. Those who fought and bled in the battle will carry the weight of their experiences with them. Heroes like Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen, and Arya Stark, who fought in the trenches, will forever be changed by the horrors they witnessed. But what about those who were not directly involved in the battle, the ones who were left behind in the cities and villages? How will they cope with the aftermath of the long night? The legacy of the Night King is not just about the heroes, it's about the survivors, the ones who must live with the knowledge that the dead once walked among them. And then there's the final question. What of the Night King's power? Even though he is gone, his magic is not so easily erased. The very forces he controlled, the ability to raise the dead, the chilling touch that froze everything in his path, are not simply extinguished with his death. The magic of the Night King was ancient, tied to the deep primal forces of the world. Could his magic still linger in the land, in the places he once touched? Could the rise of another Night King be possible, or has the threat truly been eliminated? The legacy of the Night King is more than just his death. It is the lingering question of what remains after him. The dead may have been defeated, but what if his magic still lives on, hidden in the deepest corners of Westeros, waiting to be rediscovered? What if the death of the Night King was not an end, but a new beginning for something even darker? The final battle may have been won, but the true challenge now begins. How will the survivors rebuild, and how will they confront the legacy of the Night King, who left behind not just an army of the dead, but a world forever changed? The survivors have the opportunity to shape the future, but they must reckon with the darkness that the Night King unleashed and the haunting truth that death and destruction may never truly be gone. Part 15. The Night King's True Power, Unveiling the Depths of His Magic. In the aftermath of the long night, as the survivors begin to rebuild their world, they must confront an unsettling truth. The true nature of the Night King's power is still largely unknown. His rise to power, his mastery over death, and his ability to control the forces of ice and darkness were nothing short of extraordinary. But what was the source of his power? How did the Night King, an ancient and seemingly unstoppable force, gain such dominion over life and death? The answers to these questions remain hidden, buried beneath layers of history and forgotten lore. But the Night King's true magic might be more terrifying than we ever realized. The Night King's abilities were not just limited to raising the dead or freezing his enemies in their tracks. His power was rooted in an ancient, almost primal form of magic, a magic that transcended the boundaries of life and death itself. The creation of the White Walkers, his ability to control whites, and the chilling touch that could freeze anything in his path were just a small glimpse into the true depths of his sorcery. To understand the Night King's magic, we must first examine the origins of the magic itself. Many believe that the Night King was created by the children of the forest as a weapon, designed to defend their sacred lands from the first men. But what if the Night King's power was not something that could be easily controlled, not something created solely for the purpose of war? What if the children of the forest inadvertently unleashed a force far darker than they could have ever imagined? It is widely believed that the Night King's powers were tied to the ancient magic of the children of the forest, the dark natural magic that they wielded to shape the world around them. The children were beings of great power, able to manipulate the forces of nature to their will. However, their magic came at a cost. The forces they harnessed were not always benign. When they created the Night King, they tapped into an ancient and malevolent force that was beyond their understanding. The Night King's power then could be seen as a manifestation of that ancient force, one that was not entirely under the control of the children of the forest. One of the most terrifying aspects of the Night King's magic was his ability to raise the dead. This power was not simply about reanimating corpses, it was about controlling the very essence of life itself. The whites were not just mindless husks, they were vessels for the Night King's will, reanimated by his dark magic. The fact that the Night King could create and command an army of the dead means that he had complete dominion over death itself. This ability was a profound reflection of his power, an indication that he could not only manipulate the physical realm, but could also bend the very laws of life and death to his will. But the true depths of the Night King's power may be even darker than we understand. It is not just that he could raise the dead, it is that he could control their very souls. The whites, as terrifying as they were not just reanimated bodies. They were, in essence, the lost souls of the dead, trapped in an endless cycle of servitude to the Night King. This idea takes the Night King's power to an entirely new level. He didn't just bring the dead back to life, he claimed their very essence, stealing their souls and using them as tools to further his own dark agenda. But what was the ultimate goal of this power? The Night King's mission was never entirely clear. His desire to destroy humanity seemed driven by an almost inhuman logic. But what if his true goal was something more intricate? What if the Night King sought to achieve a new order, one in which the very nature of life and death was rewritten? His powers were not just about destruction, they were about restructuring the fundamental laws of existence. Another unsettling possibility is that the Night King's powers were tied to the very fabric of winter itself. His ability to summon cold and frost, to freeze the world in his wake, may have been more than just a tactic of war. It could have been a manifestation of his control over the natural elements. The forces of winter were intimately connected to the Night King, almost as if they were two sides of the same coin. The cold was not merely a weapon, it was an integral part of his magic, a reflection of his power to dominate the world around him. But what about the Night King's most terrifying ability, the power to turn others into White Walkers? The act of transforming humans into one of his lieutenants was no ordinary spell. It wasn't just about raising the dead, it was about creating a new form of life, a new breed of soldier entirely under his control. To transform someone into a White Walker was to strip them of their humanity and reshape them into something unrecognizable, something far colder, more lethal, and more loyal to the Night King than any living being could be. This ability was not just a show of power, it was a fundamental reshaping of life itself, an act that tore at the very essence of what it meant to be alive. As we delve deeper into the origins of the Night King's power, we must consider the possibility that his abilities were far older than the children of the forest, and perhaps even the first men themselves. Some ancient texts speak of a time before the arrival of both the first men and the children, a time when the world was ruled by dark forces that wielded magic far beyond human understanding. It is possible that the Night King's powers were connected to these ancient forces, forces that existed before the gods themselves. If this is true, then the Night King was not just a weapon created by the children of the forest. He was a relic of an older age, a being who existed long before the rise of human civilization, waiting for the right time to return. As we now know, the Night King was finally defeated. but the true extent of his magic and its origins remain shrouded in mystery. His death does not mean the end of the darkness he represented. The very forces he commanded, death, ice, and the corruption of life, still echo throughout the world. The survivors may have vanquished him, but they must now confront the lingering presence of his magic. Could the Night King's power return in some other form? Could his magic still be alive in the world, waiting for a new vessel to carry it forward? Part 16. The Night King's Origins. The hidden truth behind his creation, the Night King. His very name strikes fear into the hearts of those who dare to speak it. But who was he before he became the cold, unfeeling ruler of the undead? What are the origins of this mysterious figure, and how did he come to wield such devastating power? The truth behind his creation is a tale buried in ancient history, hidden in the shadows of time, and it is one that may reveal far more than anyone could have anticipated. To truly understand the Night King, we must first look beyond the history we know, the history shaped by the first men, the children of the forest, and the stories told by the living. The origins of the Night King trace back to a time before the realm was divided, before the wall was built, and before the Age of Heroes. His creation is tied to a forgotten chapter of Westeros's history, a dark age when the forces of magic and nature were not so easily controlled. The Night King was not born of the world as we know it. He was created from something much deeper, something ancient. The most widely accepted story is that the children of the forest were the creators of the Night King. According to legend, the children, in their efforts to protect their sacred forests from the invading first men, turned to dark magic, using powers they barely understood. In their desperation, they crafted the Night King, an unnatural being designed to be a weapon, the perfect tool to fight back against their human enemies. They used their ancient magic to bind a human man to the forces of ice and death, transforming him into something far more powerful than anything they had ever imagined. This man, it is said, became the first White Walker, and through his transformation, he gained the ability to control the dead, to summon the forces of winter, and to bring terror to all living things. The children of the forest thought they had crafted a savior, but in reality, they had unleashed a monster, one whose power would grow beyond their control. But this story, while widely believed, is far from the whole truth. The tale of the Night King's creation, as told by the children of the forest, is not as simple as it seems. There are whispers of a deeper, older force at play in the Night King's origin, one that may have existed long before the children themselves. It is said that the Night King was not just created from the children's magic, but was, in some ways, a product of the cosmic forces of the world itself. Long before the children of the forest set their plans into motion, the world of Westeros was shaped by the ancient forces of nature, forces that the first men and the children of the forest had little understanding of. These forces were tied to the very essence of life and death, ice and fire, and were far more powerful than any of the creatures who walked the earth at that time. The Night King's true origins may be linked to these primordial forces, a force that predates the children of the forest and their magic. One possibility is that the Night King was the embodiment of winter itself, an ancient power that existed long before the children, the first men, and the other races of Westeros. In this interpretation, the Night King was not simply a weapon created by the children, but rather a manifestation of the natural cycle of life and death, a force that existed as part of the balance of the world. The children, in their desperation, may have unwittingly summoned this force when they sought to create a weapon to defend their lands, and it may have been their manipulation of these deep, primal forces that led to the birth of the Night King. Another theory posits that the Night King was not just a man turned into a monster, but a being who had once been a priest or leader of an ancient and forgotten civilization. This man, who would eventually become the Night King, might have once been a ruler or a spiritual figure worshipped by an ancient people who had long since disappeared from history. His power in this case may not have come from the magic of the children of the forest alone, but from the mystical forces tied to his people, whose civilization was lost to time. The idea that the Night King was once a man, a leader, and possibly even a king adds an additional layer of complexity to his character. The Night King was not a mindless automaton created for a single purpose. He was once a figure of great importance, and the man who became the Night King may have had grand ambitions. If the Night King was indeed a leader before his transformation, then his motivations could have been far more intricate than simply seeking destruction. His war on humanity could have been driven by a deeper, more personal desire, one that remains a mystery even today. The children of the forest, as powerful as they were, could not have anticipated the true consequences of their creation. They may have intended to use the Night King as a weapon against the first men, but they did not realize that they were dealing with forces beyond their comprehension. The magic they wielded was not as benevolent as they believed, and the Night King's creation marked the beginning of an age of terror that would haunt the world for centuries. But perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that the Night King's creation was not an accident at all. Could it be that the children of the forest intentionally created the Night King as part of a larger plan? What if they saw in him not just a weapon to fight the first men, but something more, a tool to reshape the world itself, to control life and death, and to bring about a new order of things? The Night King's power over the dead, his ability to freeze the very fabric of existence, may have been part of a larger, more sinister design, a design that the children of the forest could not have foreseen when they unleashed him. This raises a chilling possibility. Could the children of the forest have been the true architects of the Long Night? Were they, in some way, responsible for unleashing the terror that would ravage Westeros for thousands of years? The Night King may have been the key to a larger game, one whose true purpose was far beyond what anyone could have imagined. And if that is the case, then the children of the forest were not just passive creators, they were active participants in the birth of the Long Night. In the end, the true origins of the Night King remain shrouded in mystery. Was he the result of an accident, the product of dark magic wielded by desperate beings? Or was he the creation of something far older, a force tied to the very fabric of existence? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. The Night King's origins are not as simple as they seem, and his creation is far more complex than any of us could have imagined. Part 17. The Night King's connection to the gods. Is he a divine being? The Night King. His presence looms over Westeros, and his reign of darkness left a trail of devastation across the lands. But what if the Night King was more than just an ancient weapon or a creature of darkness? What if his existence was tied to the very gods themselves, or perhaps he was a creation of higher, divine forces beyond the understanding of mortal men? As we delve deeper into the enigma of the Night King, we are forced to ask the question, is the Night King simply a powerful mortal creature, or is he something more, something divine, something born of gods themselves? Throughout history, the gods of Westeros have shaped the lives of its inhabitants, and their influence is felt in every corner of the continent. The old gods, the Seven, R'hllor, and even the Great Other, all of these divine beings and their followers have left their marks on the world. But how does the Night King fit into this divine tapestry? Could it be that the Night King's origins are not merely of magic and ice, but are deeply intertwined with the celestial forces that govern life and death? At first glance, the Night King appears to be a creature of pure darkness, a manifestation of death, ice, and despair. Yet, if we examine his role more closely, we find that his abilities and destructive powers may hint at something far greater than just a mortal, magically enhanced being. His power to summon the winter, his dominion over life and death, and his ability to raise the dead with a mere touch might suggest a connection to the Great Other, the ancient and mysterious god of darkness, death, and cold, worshipped by the followers of the Lord of Light. Could the Night King be a manifestation of this god, a physical embodiment of the very forces of darkness itself? The Great Other, as described by followers of R'hllor, is the opposite of the Lord of Light, representing cold, darkness, and death. It is said that the Great Other's influence spreads across the world, bringing cold and winter to every corner it touches. Could the Night King have been created by this god, or even been a servant of this dark deity, carrying out its will to bring eternal night to the world of men? This idea offers a chilling interpretation of the Night King's motives, suggesting that his relentless march to extinguish the living may not have been a personal vendetta, but instead an act of devotion to a higher divine power. If the Night King was truly an agent of the Great Other, his existence would take on a much more terrifying significance. He would no longer be just a creation of the children of the forest, but rather a divinely appointed being, tasked with spreading darkness and death in service of the gods. His ultimate goal in this case might have been to bring about a cosmic balance, a world in which life and death are in perfect equilibrium, where the forces of light are forever extinguished and the Great Other reigns supreme. The idea of the Night King being an instrument of the gods raises a number of intriguing questions. If he was truly a divine being, then how does his power compare to that of other gods in Westeros? For instance, the old gods of the forest, worshipped by the children of the forest, have a deep connection to the natural world. Their magic is tied to the trees, the earth, and the forces of nature, and their influence has persisted for millennia. Could the Night King have been a counterbalance to the old gods, a force meant to oppose them in the eternal struggle between light and darkness? Another possibility is that the Night King was not the direct creation of the Great Other, but was instead a being who ascended to a divine state through his own actions. It is said that the Night King was once a mortal man, a leader of an ancient civilization, and that his transformation into the Night King was the result of a sacrifice or a dark pact with forces beyond mortal comprehension. Could this pact have been made with the Great Other, with the night itself? If this is the case, then the Night King's path from mortal man to divine entity would represent a fall from grace, a tragic descent into darkness as he embraced death and cold, forsaking the warmth of life. There are also more obscure possibilities. Some scholars believe that the Night King's creation might be connected to the Lord of Light, the god of fire, who is associated with life and resurrection. The idea of the Night King being a reverse counterpart to the Lord of Light raises the question, was the Night King not only an enemy of life, but also a counterpoint to resurrection? The Lord of Light is known to possess the power to bring people back from the dead, most notably through the abilities of Melisandre and Thoros of Myr. Could the Night King, in his power over death and ice, be a dark reflection of this power, an agent whose purpose is to prevent life from returning, to ensure that the cycle of death remains unbroken, and that the cold, deathless silence of winter reigns? Another intriguing possibility is that the Night King's power over death and his ability to raise the dead could be a twisted version of the same power that the Lord of Light uses to animate and empower his followers. If the Night King is a direct counterforce to the Lord of Light, then his very existence could be a war between gods, a struggle between the forces of warmth, life, and fire against those of cold, death, and darkness. The idea that the Night King might have been created or influenced by the Great Other as part of a cosmic battle between these two divine forces adds yet another layer of complexity to his already enigmatic existence. If the Night King was truly a divine being, he would not just be a threat to humanity, but to the very fabric of the world itself. His ability to control life and death, to command the dead, and to bring the cold of winter wherever he goes, would make him a force beyond mortal comprehension, one whose motives and powers could only be understood in the context of the larger cosmic forces at play. As we continue to explore the Night King's origins, we are faced with the unsettling possibility that he was not just a product of magic or a creature of ice, but a divine entity, born of the very darkness that surrounds us all. His role in the history of Westeros, then, may not simply be as a conqueror or a destroyer, but as a key player in a larger cosmic drama, one that is beyond the understanding of mortals. Part 18. The Night King's Ultimate Goal. What did he want? The Night King's icy reign was not just a force of destruction, it was a relentless march towards something greater, something more terrifying. But what was it that he truly wanted? What drove him to raise the dead, to summon an endless winter, to bring about the annihilation of humanity? His actions have left a trail of devastation across Westeros, but his true motives remain one of the greatest mysteries of all. Could his ultimate goal be as simple as revenge, or was there something deeper at play, something far more profound? As we have seen in the previous parts, the Night King is a creature of immense power, capable of commanding the dead, freezing entire landscapes, and bending the forces of nature to his will. He has no mercy, no love for life, and no desire for peace. His sole purpose seems to be the complete eradication of humanity and the imposition of a never-ending winter. But what could possibly motivate such an existence bound entirely to death and cold? What did the Night King want, if not simply destruction? The Night King's desire for immortality. One theory suggests that the Night King's true goal was not just to destroy the living, but to achieve immortality. There is evidence to support this idea when we consider his ability to raise the dead and transform them into his followers. By creating an army of undead, he essentially creates an army of immortals, beings who are no longer bound by the limitations of life and death. This connection to immortality and the desire to break free from the cycle of life and death may have been at the core of his mission. In this sense, the Night King could have been seeking to free himself from the mortal constraints that bind all living things. His transformation into the Night King, a being of ice and death, was likely a result of a desperate desire to transcend the limitations of mortality. By raising the dead, he essentially created an army of immortal soldiers, and in doing so, he may have been seeking to achieve a kind of eternal life for himself and his army. The creation of the White Walkers, the raising of the dead, and the spreading of eternal winter could have been a manifestation of this deep desire for immortality, a way of rejecting the natural order of life and death. If this is true, then the Night King's war against humanity was not just about vengeance. It was about escaping the grip of mortality and establishing a kingdom where death no longer had power. His creation of the undead army was not just an act of destruction, it was an attempt to build a new world order, one where life and death no longer had meaning. In this new world, the Night King would reign as an immortal being, forever controlling life and death in a world that never aged, never died, and never changed. The Night King's desire for control. Another possible goal of the Night King's reign was the complete control of Westeros and its inhabitants. The Night King's ability to control the dead and manipulate the forces of winter suggests that his ultimate aim may have been more than just the destruction of humanity. His desire for absolute power over the living and the dead could have been the driving force behind his actions. The Night King's ability to raise and control the dead was not just about creating an army, it was about exerting dominance over life itself. The ability to control life and death would have given him unparalleled power in the world of Westeros. By raising the dead and transforming them into mindless soldiers, he could easily wipe out any opposition, crush any rebellion, and create a new world order in which he was the undisputed ruler. With the power to control the dead, he could effectively rule over the entire population of Westeros, ensuring that no one could ever challenge his reign. But why was this control so important to him? What would the Night King have done with such power once he achieved it? The answer may lie in the nature of his creation. As we've discussed earlier, the Night King was a being created by the children of the forest through dark magic, a weapon designed to fight back against the First Men. In this sense, the Night King may have been programmed with a singular purpose: to control and dominate. His very existence was likely born out of a desire for control, and this ambition may have driven his entire campaign. To have control over life, death, and the dead would have made him the ultimate power in the world, one that could never be opposed. The Night King's desire to destroy the old world. The Night King's war against humanity could also be interpreted as a destructive response to the existing world order. His desire for eternal winter and the raising of the dead could have been a reaction against the world of the living, the world of life, growth, and change. The Night King, with his unrelenting cold and the power to extinguish life, may have been trying to destroy everything that represented growth and change. His endless winter could have been a rebuke to the natural world, a world that is constantly changing and evolving. The existence of the Night King represents an eternal, unchanging force, the cold, the death, the absence of life. If we examine his actions through this lens, we can see that the Night King's desire for the extinction of humanity was not just about eradicating a threat, it was about freezing time itself. By turning the world into a place of perpetual cold and death, he sought to create a world that would never change, a world that would remain frozen in time. In this world, there would be no growth, no evolution, and no new life, only the relentless cold and the stillness of death. The Night King's rejection of the cycle of life and death. The most chilling possibility is that the Night King's ultimate goal was the rejection of the natural cycle of life and death itself. Throughout history, the living and the dead have been bound by a natural cycle, a cycle in which life gives way to death and death gives way to new life. The Night King, however, sought to break this cycle. His quest to raise the dead and turn them into mindless soldiers, his power to freeze the very essence of time, and his desire to cast the world into an eternal winter may have been an attempt to create a world where the cycle of life and death no longer existed. In this new world, there would be no rebirth, no resurrection, only the cold, still silence of death. In rejecting this cycle, the Night King may have sought to create a world that was static, where nothing could ever change or evolve. His desire for eternal winter and the destruction of humanity may have been part of a grand plan to break the very laws of nature, to cast the world into a permanent state of cold and death, where the cycle of life would be forever halted. Part 19. The Final Truth. Who was the Night King before the ice? The Night King shattered into 1,000 icy fragments, but what truly broke that night was not just his form, it was our illusion that we had understood anything at all. The silence he left behind wasn't just the end of a war, it was a void, a haunting emptiness that begged one last terrible question: who was he? Before the cold. We've been told a story, that he was once a man, one of the first men, taken by the children of the forest, tied to a weirwood tree and stabbed through the heart with dragon glass, a weapon made to fight back against the encroachment of humankind. But that's all we were ever given. A few seconds of ancient ritual, a glimpse, a myth wrapped in half-truths. But who was he really? Was he a king, a warrior, a betrayer, a willing sacrifice? Did he scream in pain or embrace the transformation? Was he chosen or cursed? Some theories suggest he may have been the last king of a lost civilization, one that stretched far beyond the maps of Westeros. A high-born figure, ancient and proud, betrayed by his own kind or tempted by a darker power. Others claim he may have been a great hero, offered up as a sacrifice by the children themselves, meant to wield power on their behalf, only for the magic to twist him into something uncontainable, something they could no longer control. And then there are whispers, darker still, that he wasn't just a man, that he may have been a demigod, a blood descendant of the Great Other itself, a creature of shadow and ice, born into flesh only to be awakened when the stars aligned. That the ritual we saw wasn't creating a monster, it was releasing one. What makes this even more unnerving is that we may have already met him before the transformation, and never known it. What if he walked among the first men as a commander, a seer, a prophet? What if his transformation wasn't the beginning of his power, but the final piece? You see, in Game of Thrones, power always has a price, and great power, the power to raise the dead, freeze time, defy nature, must come from somewhere. So what did this man sacrifice to gain it? His soul? His name? His past? Perhaps that's the true terror of the Night King. Not what he became, but what he left behind. The man beneath the ice, buried by centuries of silence, stripped of identity until only purpose remained. A face turned to stone, a name lost to time, a memory that no longer mattered. And here's the part that chills the blood. We don't know if it's over. Magic doesn't die with the wielder. The children may still possess the knowledge. The weirwoods still drink the blood of sacrifice. The cycle could repeat. Another man, another ritual, another king, waiting to fall. So when we ask, who was the Night King before the ice? We're really asking something else. Who might be next? No more battles, no more screams, no more whispers in the cold. But the Night King was never just a man. He was a question, a shadow, a myth wearing skin. And myths don't die. They wait, somewhere beyond the frost, beyond the wall. Something ancient still breathes. Perhaps he was the first. Perhaps he was one of many. Perhaps he will return, not as the same figure, but as the idea reborn. A child touched by strange dreams. A king staring too long into the fire. A raven watching, always watching. The long night has ended, but the darkness, it never left. So if you wake one day and feel the air still, hear no birds, and see frost creeping where it shouldn't be, don't run, don't scream. Just remember, he was never truly gone, and winter always remembers.